Hello, I'm attorney Tammy Saltzman, and you are watching Divorce Connection Network. I am so pleased today to introduce you once again to Laura Blackman. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Tammy. How are you?
I'm great. Laura and I are very dear friends. We've been practicing together in Boca for quite some time. She's been practicing 20 plus years. She's a collaborative trained lawyer, and she's a litigator. So we today are going to talk about addictions. And addictions come in many forms and in many manners, and addictions sometimes can stay hidden for quite a long time before they surface. Isn't that true?
That is so true.
Addicts have a way of hiding their addictions so that people don't find out what their addictions are. And we all have a vice. Everybody has a vice. But addictions could be serious. So we have addictions to drugs, and we have addictions to alcohol, addictions to gambling, pornography, sex, and the list goes on. So when addiction is part of a marriage and it becomes destructive, a lot of times we get these consults that come in and they're done. They can't. One spouse can't handle it anymore.
Correct. Usually what happens is the family has one party that's an addict, and they try to go to a 12-step program. They try to go to rehab, or nothing really happens, and the family breaks down. So when a client comes to see me, the first thing, usually I find out about the addictions at the end of the consult, like we always find out the elephant in the room at the end of the consult. And whether it's drugs, sex, alcohol, gambling, spending, whatever it is, there's usually spending. Usually there's crossover addictions, and the trust and the respect are gone. So what I try to help my clients with is to protect the money and the assets, and to stop the bleeding with the liabilities, and to help the party to protect the children, the safety of the children, and the safety of themselves.
Okay, so let's start with financially. How can you advise clients who are considering a divorce right now with a spouse who has an addiction, and they're spending money on whatever this addiction may be? What do you recommend to stop the bleeding?
Okay. Well, first of all, if the case has not been filed yet, it's pretty difficult, because the spouse whose name is on an IRA or a pension or a 401k or any account can go liquidate the money. So what happens sometimes prior to the consult is they come to me, and a lot of these assets are already liquidated, which some of the assets have tax liabilities. So we have now another liability from these assets, and the asset is dissipated.
So what can we do to prevent the dissipation of assets? Now, what you said was very important that I want the audience to hear. Until you file a petition of dissolution of marriage, the court has no jurisdiction over you, your spouse, or your assets. So that was very important that you brought that up.
Yes, that's correct. So once we file and we know that there's an addict in the family, what we do is we go to court and we petition the court to freeze the assets so that these assets can be protected for the family unit.
That's very important to understand. A lot of people want to know, how do I freeze the assets? They maybe don't want to file yet. So sometimes, if the spouse is willing, what we can do as attorneys is prepare postnuptial agreements, quite often,
Correct,
that allocate or separate the assets and protect the spouse and the family while still staying in the marriage.
Right. So that's a whole other discussion, because sometimes when clients come to me and they say, I really want to help my husband, or I want to help my wife, but they've been through the 12-step program, or they've been through rehab, I suggest to them a postnuptial agreement. And I know we've discussed this, during our last session, and you've had other guests on the show. Postnuptial agreement is like a prenuptial agreement, but it is done during the marriage, and it basically is a divorce contract, and it deals with divorce and it deals with death. So sometimes people who have addictions in the family go that route. Most of the time it ends up in divorce,
yes,
but at least we can gather the information, all the financials, and get all of the information about what's in the pot, assets and liabilities, during the preparation of the postnuptial agreement, which helps protect the assets.
That's right. So when you're married, and you start talking about divorce, usually the addicted spouse is going to say, I'll go back to rehab, I'll do anything, I don't want to lose the marriage. So a way to protect yourself is with a postnuptial agreement. And you can use divorce attorneys or matrimonial attorneys for other things other than divorce, such as saving your marriage. Sometimes having this type of an agreement will give the non-addicted spouse the peace of mind they need in order to give the other spouse one more chance. Quite often it's not successful.
Yeah, that's so true. What happens is then they come in and they do file.
So when you're married and your spouse comes to you and says that he is going or she is going to try one more time, you can use a divorce or a matrimonial attorney in order to save the marriage and protect the assets and prepare what's called the postnuptial agreement so that you have peace of mind, the non-addicted spouse, to give that addicted spouse one last chance.
And sometimes that doesn't work. Unfortunately, we know that.
We know that.
So what I try to do when I meet a client that has these issues in their marriage is I try to give them the tools to deal with and to cope with an addict in the family, for the children and for themselves. I always recommend a mental health professional to try to help the family, the children, and the spouse if they're already through the 12-step program and rehab and everything like that, which is really important. It's crucial that the children are protected. So I have several clients now where the wife is giving the children for visitation to the father. In these two cases, it's the father who's the addict. It sometimes is the wife. And the father came inebriated, and the mother did not give the children. So the father called the police, and it was a whole mess. But the bottom line is, if the husband was inebriated and the children were in harm's way, then my client could have been brought up on failure to protect charges.
Right, neglect charges. So there's a lot of information we're discussing, so I just want to reiterate. Mental health professionals, very important, and when you're interviewing mental health professionals, it's important to find someone who deals with the addiction you're dealing with. There's a big difference between a marital counselor and an addiction counselor. So, as attorneys, we have lists of recommendations, but you could ask around. If you are in a 12-step program, quite often they could give you a very good recommendation as well. There's also therapists for children. Children need to learn coping skills in how to deal with a parent who has an addiction and have them understand the addiction isn't about them and it's not their fault. Very important in order to preserve the children's self-confidence and identity. And then you spoke a little bit about the importance of making sure that the spouse who's doing the visitation is not inebriated or whatever their addiction is. Maybe the spouse is addicted to porno, and when the kids go there for the weekend, they are exposed to this.
Correct.
So there are ways that we can protect kids during, visitation with supervision.
Right, that's what I wanted to discuss next, that there are supervised visitation, but that would have been done during the divorce. So sometimes, after the divorce is final, if we have these incidences that happen,
yes,
you go back for a modification of the visitation, of the custody agreement. And sometimes during the divorce, what we also get for the spouse that's worried about the children is we get random drug testing, drug and alcohol testing, which is part of the settlement. If we can prove that this person is a possible danger to the children.
So ways to protect the kids. You could write in your divorce require supervised visitation, which means that someone needs to be there when the kids are with the addicted spouse. Another way to protect the kids is to make sure that the parent who has the addiction, if he is in recovery at the moment, that there's some provisions that if he relapses or she relapses, that provisions will kick in.
Correct.
And if you fail to provide in your marital settlement agreement for these provisions, what Laura is saying is you can still protect your kids by coming to an attorney and filing a modification, which will then open up the case again, and you could then implement protection for the kids. Very important. These are great tips for the audience today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. So we want you to be really clear that, A, divorce attorneys are not just for divorce. We are here to also help you save your marriages with pre- and post-nuptial agreements.
That's correct.
And we also want you to know that there are things that you can do to save your finances. So if you have a gambler or someone who's a spendaholic or even an alcoholic or someone who is addicted to strip clubs and they're just bleeding funds, there's ways once you file to freeze assets or create a post-nuptial agreement that says we're going to take $500,000 and put it in a safe account that can't be touched. And then finally, the importance of protecting the kids, whether we use mental health counselors or whether we create supervised visitation plans. It's so important that your kids feel safe and that they don't feel that they're the ones to blame for what's going on. So you can find Laura on our website. This is her second show with us, and we're so pleased to have her back. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
And you will be able to find her on our website. You'll be able to find a link. She practices here in Boca, and she'd be more than happy to help discuss addiction issues with you if you need to. Thanks for joining us.